Oh, really? Yes. And I'm actually going to miss that.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many people at the Hudson Valley Writer Center for our second reading of the fall season. Thank you all for coming. We have a really special event. We have Jessica and Nickole and Richard, who have all come from far away to come read here tonight. So we're very grateful to all of you for coming for such a distance. The first thing I'd like to do is welcome everyone to the center. I'm Jennifer Franklin, I'm the program director, and we want to thank all of our sponsors. The programs and publications and events at the center are made possible in part by public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, Arts Westchester, and by generous grants from the David G. Taft Foundation, the Bydale Foundation, the Fandara Foundation, the St. Faith's House Foundation, and of course, the generosity of many individual donors and supporters, many of whom are here in this room tonight, who believe in the Writer Center and the importance to society of literature and creative writing, especially during these times. So thank you so much. We could not have been here for the past 30 years without all of you, and our wonderful founders are in the audience tonight. Margot Stever and Donald Stever, thank you so much for your continued support. We have our brochure for the fall. All of our courses coming up and all of our readings are in here. So if you have questions about this, please come see us afterwards. Ava and I will be happy to talk to you about anything you have in here. I want to remind you that we have another wonderful reading next Friday night. Our own Margot Taft-Stever will be reading with Arthur Z., who was her classmate in Denise Levertov's class at MIT when she was at Harvard. And there are a lot of poets in that class. And we have also Suzanne Cleary, who's sitting right next to Margot right now, who's a member of our SHP Advisory Committee, who is an editor of SHP, and who teaches here Monday night poetry class. The two of them will be reading with Arthur. So please come back next Friday night, same time, same place, for that wonderful reading. Okay. Also, one last pitch. The gala is going to be on November 22nd, and we're honoring Margot this year. She has two books that have just come out in April, a chapbook and a full-length collection. So that's November 22nd. So if you're around and can come to our gala, it's our once-a-year fundraiser. We'd really love to have you. It's at Tappan Hill. All the information is in here and on our website. Okay, so tonight we're going to have 3 readings, and we're going to have a Q&A. And the Village Bookstore is here selling books. Thank you, Matt, for coming out here on a Friday night to sell books for the poets. Jessica Jacobs is the author of Take Me With You Wherever You're Going, published by Four-Way Books. Her debut collection, also available for sale here, Pelvis with Distance, won the New Mexico Book Award in Poetry. It was also an Over the Rainbow selection by the American Library Association and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary and Julie Soup Awards. Her chapbook, In Whatever Light Left to Us, was published by Sibling Rivalry Press. She holds an MFA from Purdue, where she served as the editor-in-chief of Sycamore Review, and a BA from Smith College, where she'll be reading in a few days. Her poetry, essays, and fiction have appeared in many publications, including Orion, New England Review, Crazy Horse, and Guernica. An avid long-distance runner, Jessica has worked as a rock climbing instructor, a bartender, and a professor, leading workshops around the country and teaching for Hendrix College, UNC, Wilmington's MFA program, and the writing workshops in Greece, among other programs. And she's now the chapbook editor of the Beloit Poetry Journal. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina, with her wife, Nickole Brown, and is at work on parallel collections of essays and poems exploring spirituality. Please help me welcome Jessica Jacobs. Hi, how are you all?
Jennifer and I are fortunate enough to share a publisher in Four-Way Books, and if you haven't checked out her collection, it is absolutely beautiful. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you to Margot and Dawn for giving us a place to lay our weary heads. We've been,
Literally.
yeah, we started touring about 2 weeks ago, something like that, and we're going to be on the road for another 2.5 weeks, so we are appreciative. So tonight I'm going to primarily be reading from this collection, which I started writing during the first few years of our marriage. And we were on tour those first few years, and things were happening so quickly, and the only way that I could get them down and not forget them were by writing about them. And very quickly it became clear that these poems were also a way of helping me better understand what it means to commit yourself to another person, what it means to be in love with someone, and the person that I wanted to be. But this weird thing happened where I also started having all of these childhood memories flooding back, and I think there are a lot of writers here, right? Yes. And so when the muse comes, you listen. So I started writing these poems, and I was almost done with the collection, and what I realized was my brain was telling me that in order to understand the person that I wanted to be within this marriage, I needed to understand who I had been and what I came from. So I'm going to start with one of those poems, and you all seem lovely, so I'm going to apologize. I'm going to ask you to remember back to middle school. Yeah. Right, I'm apologizing. And for me, middle school was Central Florida in the 90s. And it was kind of a dark time for fashion. What was really cool then was something called the mall bang. Anyone? No? Okay, so let me enlighten you in case you want to try this. You have good bangs, you could totally do this. Oh, okay, awesome. We can talk afterward. So mall bangs, you take your hair and you hold it up like this, and then you use about half a can of hairspray. I'm sorry about the ozone layer, I apologize. And it's Florida, and I am a sweaty individual, and so by the end of the day, it just kind of collapses, and it's like a forehead toupee. Oh, right, I forgot. Yeah, I didn't have you in my life. So yeah, forehead toupee, right? And then that's when hormones entered the picture. So, sex suddenly everywhere. In shop class, that redhead with the jumpsuit zippered from throat to crotch, trilling, "Boys, don't touch my zipper," until they trailed her like goslings, transfixed by the shiny metal pole. The couple caught naked in the science building bathroom. Backhand whispers of, "I wouldn't even take my shoes off in there." And how many 8th grade dance parties in a country club boathouse, some girl in the corner crying about some boy nervously plucking the wales of his corduroys, waves lapping, unheard but always lapping, as I got freaked by the Pagan Twins to a Boys to Men slow jam. Confused girl meshed between two confused brothers. I tried not to stare at the girls I wished against me instead. And every day, those hallways, crowded cattle chutes, musked up clusters of young bodies, slap of sandals, snap of bra straps, high, sweet stench of mall-bought perfume. My nose to the back of another girl's neck, close enough to see a single strand escaped, curling beneath her collar, the gym class dampness between her shoulder blades. Sometimes it was all I could do to keep my clothes on, to keep from moaning aloud. Once a bucket, an occasional embarrassing slosh over the top if jostled, now a sieve, desire leaking from every pore. which is why I tried so hard to be harder, to use the world as my whetstone, sharpening myself against each day. My body cried out for armor. Big-boned, broad-shouldered, I was built for it. Forced into a dress with shoulder pads, I was the 90s littlest linebacker. So I began to run, clanking like a tank around cul-de-sacs. Began to climb, building biceps strong enough to stiff-arm the world away. Even my heart grew heavy, grew into one more thing to carry. But I graduated. And even better than surviving middle school, I fell in love, which was great. And she loved me back, which, thank you, I appreciate that. And so I figured that was something worth writing an ode about. And as you'll see, my wife has awesome hair, so what better subject? So this poem has an epigraph from Pablo Neruda. Other lovers want to live with particular eyes. I only want to be your stylist. Curly, my tangler. Who needs Rumpelstiltskin when such treasure abounds? Her gold woven around my bike gears, tangled in my toothbrush, vining every drain, even sometimes found in my mouth upon waking. And just this morning from the bathroom, she called me in. My mama's the only one who ever brushed out my hair, she said, but you're my wife. You should know. I began at the bottom, her curls separating with the thick sound of good cloth tearing. Do you see why I had no friends when I was little, she asked. Mama brushed out my hair each day before school. I eased my fingers for the first time all the way through, asked how that felt for her. Vulnerable, she said. Shimmering out beneath the overhead light, a climbing of kudzu, a symphony of trumpet vines. Her hair revealed itself. It was like Velcro, she said. Anything would stick in it. Bubblegum, spitwads, pencils. I had come home crying and Mama would hold my ugly frizzy head and say, baby, they're just jealous. As though her love could make the lie so. When it comes to her mother and I have this kind of love in common. Only now the lie has come to pass. My wife, whose hair is the shade of farm fresh yolks, the color of things rich on the tongue, whose hair sings the plaintive song of bed springs, whose hair is the drifting smoke from a village of chimneys, corkscrews enough for 1,000 bottles of wine. A ski slope of S-curves, a grove of twirling maple keys, every playground slide worth sliding. Before a rapt audience, a company of ballerinas cambers their hands to trace out in the air your hair, my dear Angora goat, my cloud of bats spiraling from the cave. Thank you. I got to sit on a couch for a whole day and just think of twisty things. Sadly, life is not all good hair. And one of the things that I was really surprised by in marriage, and I'm sure this is not true for any of you, but I told myself these amazing stories about who I was and how fantastic I was. None of you do that, I know. But this weird thing when you spend every day, day in and day out with another person, and suddenly you're forced to realize, like, maybe that's not exactly true all the time. So, a question to ask once the honeymoon is over. Big around as my bike helmet, and high as my ankle, The box turtle was halfway from my side of the road to the other. The warm sun felt delicious, my legs strong, and it was almost to the center line. I hadn't been passed by a car for miles. Figuring if it was still there, I'd pick it up on the way back, I cycled past. Years before, the woman across the street was shaped like that turtle, or more like a toadstool, really. Squat bell of a body atop the thin stalks of her legs, milky and bare beneath her frayed black house dress. It hurt her to move, clear even from my second-story window. So she brought her trash out in increments, in small, bursting grocery bags. She tossed each out the door onto the porch, then nudged them one step to the next before easing carefully, painfully, herself down, a step at a time. Then she towed them finally, slowly, into a crumpled heap at the curb. I left my window to help, then took her trash out every week after. That story. I hadn't yet told it to my wife, had I? But there was the turnaround, quicker than expected, and I spun to find a beat-down bus trailed by all the fuming cars that hadn't passed me. Steadying my handlebars against the wind, I rode back hard, dodging around crushed squirrels and tire-splayed birds. The turtle was just where I'd left it, but with the top of its shell torn away. The dead turtle, a raw red bull, its blood slashing the twinned yellow lines into an unequal sign. As in A is unequal to B, as in thinking about doing the right thing is not the same as doing it. As in, how many times did I watch that old woman shuffle bags down the stairs? Really, how many? Before I went from watching to helping. As in, with my wife beside me, I am the woman who does not hesitate to lay down her bike and give a small life safe passage. As in, I biked slowly home, told no one. As in, will she love me less when she learns I am not equal to the person I am when she is watching? So we travel a lot together, and we were in Provincetown, and it was really beautiful, and we were about to celebrate an anniversary, and Nickole turned to look at me and she said, "You've gotten so much softer." So and because I can't take a compliment, I said, "Well, yeah, if you take two really hard things and you smash them together long enough, they get soft. Like that's what happens." She didn't think that was funny. So I wrote a poem to apologize. Did it work? No. Okay. The first rule of rock tumbling is rocks must be of similar hardness. Naked on the front porch, the moon unfurling its light as though for a picnic. Our yard is silver and set for feasting. When we married, I was all elbows and ankles with one pace, which was my pace, which was fast forward. She was all cushion and curve, considerable sharpness shivved inside a pillow, deliberate thinker, decision circler, all around slow goer. Despite this, we loved hard enough to want the other always at our side. So where others reminisce of their early honeymoon years, ours were more rock tumbler, more slurry and coarse grind. two roughs bashing together until our edges wore not smooth exactly, but worn into each other, gear tight, cog in cog, turning our shared hours. Like this hour, on this night, when I stand between the moon and her, so she wears the light like an unzipped jumpsuit, shoulders plated, outer thighs striped bright. At her center, my shadow, that tailor-made eclipse, a darkness exactly my size. Though we could easily change places and have and will. She steps sides lit, I step backlit to match our shaded places. And only once we're fit like this, dark to dark, are we once more bound by the light we each carry. So I'll read one more poem from this collection and then just read one new poem for you. One of the really beautiful things in Asheville is we have something called bulbs, which is when you get above the tree line, we're at a low enough elevation that instead of snow, you just get like the most beautiful green field that you've ever seen, but on the top of a mountain. And every time you go up there, there's like kids and dogs, and like it's kind of beautiful. Because you waited for me. No, wait, hold on. Okay. Because you waited for me to fly your first kite. Let our love be this clutch of dogs off leash, the preen and posture, snort and snuffle, of saying, I smell you and therefore know you. The rolling on the backs and bearing of the bellies and the tails, an exaltation of metronomes, keeping time for their joy. If this summer is a body, let me be its tongue, tasting the green tang of the spittlebug nests, foaming the oat grass, the iron of this good dirt. A tongue to lick the salt from your upper lip, the rosary of sweat risen on your chest. A tongue to tap the top teeth and suck back like a wave whose tide rolls out through lips pursed as though for a kiss. Listen again. Thank you. As in, thank you, please. Let me be this kite lifting from your hands. Ruffled nylon paradise bird with its taut spine and crossbar, the pop of its ripstop sails, snap of its translucent tails. Give me the grand view, whitewater and mountains, but mostly of you. Head thrown back, face to the sun, holding my trace line, tethered to you always, responding to the slightest tick of your fingertips. Let me be a kite that trusts itself to the sky. Yes, gravity is inevitable as death, but why let that desecrate even a moment of this flight? So as Jennifer briefly mentioned at the end of her introduction, I'm working on a series of poems right now where I'm delving into stories from the Old Testament, from the Torah, and trying to find contemporary relevance. And I was inspired to read this after talking with Dawn about the sorry state that our environment is in right now, and in solidarity with all of the climate protests that are happening. And since you all live near New York, this title will be familiar. If you see something. Everywhere, wildfires. A town disappears in flames. White coats sift the ashes for human remains. Droughts and dust storms, while elsewhere rivers devour their banks, usurping fields and feasting on a season's harvest, flooding past the thresholds of our homes while we sleep. extinctions and die-offs, on our shores a rack of whales, beached, starved by our hunger. Coal ash speckling towns like seeds sown by a careless hand until cancer blooms. Our pharaohs shoo us along. Nothing to see here. If something were truly wrong, wouldn't others have already seen it? Yet God spoke to Moses from the burning bush because he alone paused long enough to notice what was right before him, humbling himself before that heat until he heard it speak. The world is burning too slowly for us to see it consumed. We must unstiffen our necks, unheavy our tongues. Take off your shoes. Look, speak. Wherever you are is holy ground.
Time to remind everyone that tomorrow, Jessica and Nickole will be team teaching a class on promoting poetry collections. So if it's your first poetry collection, if it's your 10th poetry collection, you will learn something in this class. If you haven't signed up and you're interested, or you know people who would be interested, sign up. There's still time tonight when you go home. And on Sunday, Nickole will be teaching an echo poetics class. So we already have about 5 people signed up for that, and about 8 people signed up for tomorrow. I'm sure that they would be happy to have you. Okay. Nickole Brown received her MFA from Vermont College. She studied literature at Oxford and was the editorial assistant for the late Hunter S. Thompson. She worked at Saraband Books for 10 years. And her first collection, Sister, a novel in poems, was published in 2007 by Red Hen Press, and a new edition was just reissued by Sibling Rivalry Press, and it's on sale in the back with Matt from Village Bookstore. Her second book, a biography in poems called Fanny Says, came out from Boa Editions in 2015. She was an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock for 4 years until she began writing full-time. Currently, she's the editor for the Marie Alexander Poetry Series and is a guest teacher at Sewanee School of Letters MFA program, the Great Smokies Writing Program, and the Hindman Settlement School. She lives with her wife, poet Jessica Jacobs, in Asheville, North Carolina, where she volunteers at 4 different animal sanctuaries. Currently, she's working on a bestiary about these animals. Not the pastoral, she says, that always made her and most of the working class folks she knows feel shut out of nature and writing about it. These poems speak in a queer, southern, trash-talking kind of way about nature beautiful, but damaged and dangerous. The first of these poems won Rattle's 2018 chapbook contest with the publication of To Those Who Were Our First Gods in 2018, and it's on sale here for $6. You all have to get one of those. A second chapbook from this project, a sequence called The Donkey Elegies, will be published by Sibling Rivalry in January 2020, and she's just fresh off a visit with donkeys. So we'll have to buy that when it comes out. Please help me welcome Nickole Brown.
How are you guys doing? This is an amazing space. It's so amazing. Ginny and the Jewel Tones, thank you so much for your hospitality, for having me here. Dawn and Margot, it's just been so lovely to be welcomed in this way. And yes, I just did get to spend a few days with 2 donkeys, Millie and Eeyore. It was kind of amazing. Got to pet them. But for the past 3.5 years, I have been working at these sanctuaries, not just to pet animals, as maybe, sorry, because it's a part of it, but to study them and to try to figure out a way to give them voice in this time of ecological destruction. And it's very important to me, and I found that when I started this, I thought it was, just the project for my next book. And I realized it's probably what I'll be doing for the long haul. One thing that occurs to me a lot, we often call this era the Anthropocene, which is absolutely true. As humans, our reach is in every corner of the globe now, but I often think of what E.O. Wilson says about this age. He calls it the Eremocene, which is essentially what he calls the age of loneliness. And I think of maybe God, like what that Silent Spring that Rachel Carson talked about, what that could be. So that said, I'm going to start with a kind of prayer with an invocation. It's called a prayer to talk to animals. Lord, I ain't asking to be the beast master Jim ripped in a jungle loincloth, or a Dr. Doolittle, or even the expensive vet down the street, that stethoscoped redhead, her diamond ring big as a Cracker Jack toy. All I want is for you to help me flip off this light box and its scroll of dread, to rip a tiny tear between this world and that, a slit in the veil, Lord, one of those old-fashioned peeping keyholes through which I can press my dumb lips and speak. If you will, Lord, make me the teeth hot in the mouth of a raccoon scraping the junk I scraped from last night's plates. Make me the blue eye of that young crow cocked to me, too selfish to even look up from the flash of my damn phone. Oh, forgive me, Lord, how human I've become. Busy clicking what I like, busy pushing my cuticles back and back to expose all 10 pale, useless moons. Would you let me tell your creatures how sorry I am? Let them know exactly what we've done. Am I not an animal too? If so, Lord, make me one again. Give me back my dirty claws and blood-warm horns. Break back those long, frayed strands of every nerve tingling with all I thought I had to do today. Fork my tongue, Lord. There is a sorrow on the air I taste but cannot name. I want to open my mouth and know the exact flavor of what's to come. I want to open my mouth and sound a language that calls all language home. So as Jessie mentioned, she is studying the Old Testament. One of the things she decided to do to me was to read the book of Judges in bed, which it's like, honey, you can't do that. You just can't. But as she did, she said, man, like, have you really looked at Samson lately? I was like, yeah, I remember saying Bible school, I remember that. And she said, no, look again. And so I revisited that story and found I had a lot to say to him. So I ended up writing this poem, and it's in 4 parts. And the title of this poem is the title of the chapbook. It's called To Those Who Were Our First Gods, an Offering. 1. Samson, I admit it. I flirted with you in Sunday school, crayon tan your He-Man pecs, picked the boxes best to dye bright your Pantene perfect waves. But even then, I didn't touch those kamikaze columns, left blank those 2 stone pillars, snapped with your sledgehammer fist to crush a whole damn crowd. Yes, even then, I was a real red-letter girl, timid in the back pew, hiding behind the blue cloak of the only one I ever felt safe enough to pray to. Hail Mary, keep me from judges and every other book in the OT gut piled and slick as the slaughterhouse floor. Dear Mary, Mother of, save me from those men like him who slit the throats of lambs, then struck a pyre to burn the poor beasts, calling what they've done a sacrifice. Even now, I'm trying to understand those jacked up swaths of the Bible everyone shoves under the rug, like your barbarian move to snag 300 fox and bind them in terrified pairs. And if that wasn't enough, you roped a lit torch between their tails, Samson, then freed them screaming to burn green fields and olive groves, to burn alive. Samson, did I ever tell you after hearing that story of yours, my cousin bolted out of church to try to shove firecrackers up the poodle's ass? When I cried, my aunt called the dog from the yard, said, "Don't mind them boys, they're just proving themselves." The only boy I knew back then with nothing to prove lived down the street, and in the sleeve of his jean jacket he kept a foundling squirrel, nursed it pan-warm milk with a syringe. That little boy's name was Pete, but everyone called him Faggot. So tell me, Samson, that donkey's jaw, did you ever think it wrong to wield a thing accustomed to the piece of fresh hay and swing it like a thug does a baseball bat? And is it really a miracle to pry open the proud mouth of a lion and rip apart his face? And why, a year later, did you return to the scene? Just to toy with the trophy of his corpse? Either way, you pillaged a hive that had made sanctuary in what was left of his chest. I see you there, Samson, squatting inside the broken cage of ribs, reaching to where the great cat's heart used to be, snatching another stinging comb, the crust of dead bees and their honey in your beard. Because you didn't just spring hot from the mouth of wrath to slay the enemy of your tribe, did you? No, Samson, you came to kill those bees who were our first gods, those forms we used to paint on cave walls, those animals who were not made as sacrifice for your altars, but were the temples themselves. Come here, big man. It is time you wake. It is time you find a different answer. Time to solve your own riddle once again. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Because the answer is no longer fear curdled into rage, a murdered lion with a swarm sugaring his remains. Answer me, because I see you, you action figure lackey, you lonely tender heart duped by your girlfriend's shears. I wait next to your sleeping head to gather what she cuts from you, and outside, I set it free. Can you say it? Do you see? Your hair, spun with spider silk and likened to make a hummingbird's thumbnail home. Your hair matted into the tatters of chewed through clothes to cradle a litter naked and pink. Your hair tucked into musky dens, a spun gold currency flown among crows. Your hair, the soft bed where strays bleed and possums piss. Your hair lining every hollow, warming the throne of Alice. You see, Samson, your whole kingdom steals away your locks by tooth and talon and claw. Your strength taken from you, but given back to whom it rightfully belongs. All right, I'll go sweet and then I'll get heavy and then I'll get out of it because you've got to hear this man right here. I have so much respect for Richard and his work. This is another sort of prayer, and I like to say my dog wrote this poem. We went out into the woods, and Jessica had this wonderful trail route all set out for us, and I was like, Solace, you lead the way. And so we just listened to stuff and stopped and sat down, and I wrote down what she told me to write down. It's called Prayer to Be Still and Know. Lord, let my ears go secret agent, each a microphone so hot it picks up things silent, reverbing even the hum of stone close to its eager silver grill. Let my ears forget years trained to human chatter wired into every room, even those empty, except of me, each broadcast and jingle tricking me into being less lonely than I am. Let my ears forget the clack and rumble, our tambourining and fireworking distractions, our roar of applause. Let my hands quit their clapping and rest in a new kind of prayer, one that doesn't ask, but listens, palms up in my lap. Like an owl, let me triangulate icy shuffling under snow as bull. Let me not just name the name when I spot a soundtrack of bird song, but understand the notes through each she rings as a singular missive, begging, flirting, fussing, each companion call an alarm as sharp with desire and fear as my own. Prick my ears, Lord. Make them hungry satellites. Have your way with their tiny bones. Teach the drum within that dark to drum again. Because within the hammering of woodpecker is a long tongue unwinding like a tape measure from inside his pileated head, darting dinner from the pine's soft bark. And somewhere, I know, is a spider who births a filament of silk and flies it to the next branch. Somewhere, the fiddle hunt unstrings its violin into the miracle of fern. And somewhere, a mink not made into a coat cracks open a mussel shell and with her mouth full of that gray meat, yawns. Those are your sounds, are they not? Do not deny it, Lord. Do not deny me. I do not know those songs, nor do I know the hush the dandelion's face makes when it closes, surrenders, then goes to seed. No, I only know the sound my own breath makes as I wish and blow that perfect globe away. I only know the small, satisfactory popping of roots when I call it weed, and yank it from the yard. There is a language of all you created. Hear me, please. I just want to be still enough to hear. Right here, Lord, I want to be. Now I'm changing my mind. Jessica took you back to middle school. I'm going to take you back to high school. Kentucky High School. This poem is called Wild Thing. What I knew then was plastic packages of ramen. Instant. 4 for $1. Because with 4 eggs, to match, I had myself 4 dinners, provided I could keep the gas on for the month and get that old stove lit with a match. I also knew what went at the store for $1. Pinto beans and sliced white, popcorn, carrots, peas, even juice, long as it was orange, concentrated and frozen in a can. But what I didn't yet know was how that word, buck, got started. Back with my daddy's daddy, and on back down the line. Back when for their roomy knees men used panther oil, brought all the way up from Florida when panthers still lived down there. Back when men without a dime to their name could pay land taxes and skins and piled as many kills they could on a wagon headed downtown to sell deer for just that. For $1, $1 a pop. No, what I knew then were bucks in my tip jar, how never to start the night empty, but to always put in a few of my own. Otherwise, not a soul would think me worth $1 and would trash the whole shift with the rattle of pocket change. And though I couldn't have said when deer season hit, no one had to tell me about the weather it brought, how cardboard crammed between wind-rattled panes helped, but barely enough. How under every cover I owned, I'd sleep until the floor stung my feet awake with cold. Once I got up and turned over my car, I might just make it to work on time, but not until I got stuck at a red light with a man who split his 2 fingers apart to make a V for the snake flick of his fat tongue, which meant something about a good time, before he gunned his truck and gave me the full view of what his flatbed towed. A white-tailed doe, one eye open, but somehow more milk or smoke or dirty dishwater than I, her tongue off its hinge, flopping obscene with every bump down that road. On my popping speakers, a new version of that same old song. Now you don't need that money when you look like that, do you, honey? And it was then I knew the bullshit made up for the endless litany to hit these woods. All those floods that scrubbed the babes from their burrows, lifting their pink writhing to a flotsam of rot. Or else a rage of flames to crowd those same holes with natural-born enemies, snakes, huddled alongside a scorched blister of mice and turtles nearly cooked in their own shells. And everybody saying wild things could care for themselves and always knew what to do, how to seek higher ground and survive. But really, believing that made me just another fool in this world mistaking the happiness of looking at a pretty wild thing with the happiness that thing feels. Put another way, I was once young and terribly pretty and gripped the wheel white, felt the rip in the vinyl seat, rubbed the part of my leg raw where my skirt didn't cover. I shut off my radio. In the silence was the talk of men I'd heard all my life. The bumper stickers that read, "Show me your rack," and "Chasing white tail." All the old jokes. That buck not dead, but put down for his dirt nap and itching for a mount. That doe not female, but a slick head, hot and ready for the rut. All those not shot, but taken in peak season, in sweet, sweet November. Put another way, I was almost on empty. And though no one believed it or cared to see, I was just another animal. And like all animals desired, we would suffer. Thank you guys so much.
Everyone who's not here tonight is really missing out.
Yeah.
Tell the other students, Megan, Eric. Okay, thank you, Nickole. Richard Foerster is an American poet and the author of 8 collections. Is it still 8 or is it 9 now? It's still 8, okay. His most, and they're almost all on sale here, so come see us afterwards. His most recent collection is Boy on a Doorstep, New and Selected Poems from Tiger Bark Press, 2019. His poems have appeared in literary journals and magazines all over the nation, including Poetry, The Nation, New England Review, Prairie Schooner, Tri-Quarterly, Kenyon Review, Shenandoah, and the Southern Review. His honors include 2 fellowships from the NEA, a Maine Arts Commission Fellowship, and the Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship. I'm not going to take any more of your time. Just come up here and read to us. Help me welcome William Foerster.
Thank you so much. Okay, let me adjust this. How's that? Does that work?
Good.
Thanks so much to be back here. I can't remember, I read here during an ice storm once, and I think there were 4 people in the audience, plus Mark and Don. And I appreciate being back here again. It's bringing back memories of I grew up in the Bronx, lived in Bronxville, then Mount Kisco, and there were poetry readings and parties, and David Doyle lived down the road, and Bob Phillips in Katona with his series there. And so I've been in Maine now for 34 years, so it's good to be back. I'm going to be reading mostly from the New and Selected, which spans 40 years of my writing, but I printed out the copies. It's easier for me to go like that than flick through pages. But I'm going to start with a new poem that's going to be in Tar River Poetry next month, and it's called Numismatics. And it's inspired by this, which looks like a beautiful American silver dollar, but then you turn it around and you can see, I'll pass it around, you can see what's on it. And I thought I'd read this because of what's the tragedy that's going on in Washington right now. And thank you for letting me share the stage with you, these powerful poets, these fierce women. I mean, really an honor. You're just a joy to listen to, both of you. Numismatics. The tarnished coins of Roman emperors I once avidly collected lie boxed like buttons orphaned in my dresser drawer. For years I used to sit face to face with the infamous and obscure and scrutinize the dime-sized portraits, the lettered halos of their names and honorifics, the abbreviated spins on governance and piety. Who but a classicist now would care to spend hours, say, with avuncular, hook-nosed Nerva, pater patriae, to learn he ruled for a year and a half, then died in bed? Or that scraggly, stern-browed Pertinax, gung-ho on reform, was slain after a single winter on the throne by his own praetorians, then enrolled among the gods. Render unto Caesar, we're told, the things that are Caesar's. In America, coinage has been a province of the safely dead, the presumed great, the too soon struck down, or the minted ideals we deify as liberty, then dress in a Roman smock. I reminded a friend of that fact when, with a half smile bordering on a smirk, she gifted me a knockoff silver dollar from Wish.com, made in China, but bearing the Great Seal of the United States and the now familiar legend. And there, smugly on the front, beside a tinsely silhouette of liberty and a colorized backdrop of his tower, was a headshot of himself beneath an arch in caps, the President of the United States. Forget, and to God, the things that are God's. History records that Nerva succeeded tyrannical Domitian, in whose murder his wife was complicit, and that Pertinax ascended to the purple when would-be gladiator Commodus the Insane was strangled by his sparring partner, an athlete aptly named Narcissus. Today, again with my magnifying glass in hand, I realized how mistaken I was all those years ago, squinting for hours over those mirroring pools, not to see in each imperial face that rippled up at me proof of one deathless countenance, melted down and refined, then forged again into this common species. Our hammers echo ceaselessly, "Hail Caesar, father of our nation." It's like we're all a bit complicit in the tragedy that's going on, I think, and we all share in that somehow. And I leave that, just that ending there, these hammers that are endless. Growing up, first book I think I bought with my own money was a paperback of Edith Hamilton's mythology. And I just adored that. And it was so dogged. I think I still have it. It doesn't have a cover anymore, and its paper is yellowing. But those were my favorite. And so this plays on the myth of Adonis, who was beloved of Aphrodite, was killed in a hunting accident, blood on the ground, and Aphrodite poured nectar over it, and he returns as a flower. In ancient Athens, there was a feast of Adonis called the Adonia, and women would take pottery shards and force lettuce and fennel in the shards, waited until they sprouted, put the shards up on the roof in the sun until they wilted, gathered them up, and then they would have a religious procession down to the sea and throw all this in the water, and they would be wailing the death of Adonis again until next year when the seed sprouted. Here's my take on it. A pot of crocuses. The weathered crocus pot, which I coddled each winter under salt marsh hay, again commands its center stage in my kitchen window. In terraced beds, the corms poke through the soil like randy waking gods, their pale phalluses swelling in the sun. All morning, I reveled in the comfort of ancient ritual, till my neighbor's gap-kneed boy on Easter break began to trundle up and down the street on his skateboard, trying to gain the necessary speed that could spring-load him into air. As if in that moment he would escape once and for all the tedious maze of his adolescence and return perfect and unbloodied to an earth remade invincible with flowers. So I watched in secret and found myself urging him on, but soon he slouched off with raw, abraded palms toward home, and I felt I needed to call him back, my not quite budding Adonis, but could see on the asphalt beneath my window the small red stains from his hands. And I wanted to say, here, take these crocuses to your mother, so she might forgive the scarring a woman has to endure to see a boy safely to manhood. Instead, I stood there wavering with that crowded pot of spikes in my hands, and I knew if I had summoned him, it wouldn't have been for any promise of beauty I had to offer, nor any incorruptible idea of it, nor even the cherished terracotta I've buried and retrieved these 15 years. For how could I have looked him in the eyes, not knowing which of these must end up broken first? Another young man being stared at. This poem has two references. It's one is the 4 radiant gammas, and the gamma, the Greek letter G. The 4 gammas make up a swastika. And the other reference is to Gomorrah, which was the code name for the firebombing of Hamburg in 1943. Poolside in Provincetown. I couldn't help scrutinizing the faded inks he wore, like a manifesto, fleshed out constellation that floated on pallid skin. His arms were skulled and daggered, twinned sibilant bolts zagged his thighs, and through the thicket of his chest, hooded ember-eyed knights peered. His pierced nipples doubled as shields bossed with pink suns. Within the cloak's deep folds, the cross wavered like flames when he laughed, seeing me cock my head to read the scripted Gothic motto that arched round his belly's sunken grotto, Aryan Nation. I don't know when exactly I loosened to his barleyed charm, but soon I was swigging beers, able to imagine him clothed, less a stranger than close acquaintance, feckless as my uncle in Hamburg when I was 8, unwrapping like a sacred totem the ribboned medal the Fuhrer gave my grandmother for bearing 18 pure Aryan children to the Reich. How my mother beamed. It proves the family's not Polish, but Prussian. That stylized eagle somewhere still clutches in its talons the broken cross I thought was a sin even to jot on paper. Now there, against the pool's blue tiles, amid the playful chaos of that young man's plashing feet, just above his ankle bone, those 4 radiant gammas seem to spin like an old-world windmill's vanes set to some slow, relentless, grinding task. Miraculous what survives. Like those sibling aunts and uncles beneath the Allies' firestorms, only to emerge unscathed from Gomorrah's strafed shelters. And my mother, secure in her white gloves and post-war hats in the Bronx. When did I finally understand the import of that scarred silence the day she hurried us off the bus after I asked, pointing, why the man beside me had numbers on his wrist. This other one, too, caught me mutely staring, but had no ill-fitting sleeves to tug, nothing at all to hide, no gesture I might misread as shame. Home set on a honeymoon night. This is 1972, so think of the B-52s, you know, those big hairdos. It's called hairdo. That night, in our second floor hotel room, overlooking the commerce of the parking lot where girls bare legs in late October stepped smoothly in and out of cars, I waited naked in the bed as she prepared herself, sealed the dress up in its plastic bag, misted herself with a negligee and the now familiar scent, and gazed, her back to me, into the silver pool of her own regrets and expectations. When finally she came to me for foreplay, she asked that I remove the bobby pins girdering the upsweep of her curls. I counted 48, 49, 50, as my fingers searched ever deeper through the mysteries of another man's creation. Slowly, the marvel came undone. 100 pins, as if one more or less would have missed perfection. And afterwards, looking down at that unruly thing, like a prop for the final act of a tragedy, I hid my face in the chaos I had made. And since we're going back to our early school days, this was pre-planned. I went to Fordham Prep in the Bronx, Jesuit school, and I have to move this. Can I move this?
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm right at the edge and
Sure.
I'm teetering back and
Move
forth.
it wherever you'd like.
All right, I'm going to put it back here.
Yeah.
All right. They were scared to death that we good Catholic boys might have sex during our prom. So this explains the film they showed to us at the end of this. It's called Training Film, 1967. And it was set in May, and when we would all on the Fordham campus march out to the Statue of Mary and good boys in our blazers to say the rosary. So Training Film, 1967. When I think on how my body loves, how the reined discipline of desire can be so casually unbridled, I find myself with an adolescent's pulsing confusion. Back in that spring, our cassocked teachers marched us, mute soldiers of Christ, well prepped in devotion, to stand blue blazered in the sun, stiff as the effigy we came to honor. 800 boys arrayed on a campus quad. We'd thumb our rosaries, black beads, through fists as if cocking and recocking rifles to the tempoed drone of our Hail Marys. How I hymned the Virgin's praise, lost among those cultish voices, leaping up in chords embarrassing as acme. All that May, summer loomed with redemptive promise, ticking down through exams and valedictions, fittings for the big tuxed night of the prom. And sex lurked deep in the amazed gropings of the mind, a place our teachers feared they'd never delve except by projecting the blatant blood of troubled births, that film of breached flowerings and episiotomized genitalia erupting to seraphic red skulls, which disembodied hands wrenched wailing into glare. So it is on nights when my tongue leaves the bud, my broaching prayer at a salvatory gate. I reel again through shuttered puberty to face the scalpels wielded at the groin. My marriage ended in divorce. And this poem, after 25 years of silence from my wife, I get an email. And the bits of dialogue that come up here are lifted exactly from that email. And to someone somewhere after all these years, I thought divorcing was an art worth perfecting over time, like a vintage coaxed through fermentation, bottled with a label, and consigned to a near unconscious cavern till it might mature and decades later be ready for toast and savoring. But after more than twice the span our marriage lasted, when I clicked the email labeled "Hi," I sensed by the way it filled the screen this was nothing I should have chosen to read alone. And yet I sipped. We should be able to communicate. Then more, I told you you'd win awards, I dreamt it. Then came the subtler, I lost the real love of my life to Alzheimer's. And despite the way my head reeled, I knew she clearly meant not me. I swallowed hard. Were you ever going to tell me you are gay? And I'm not writing with recriminations in mind, but I just thought we might, I don't know what, be friends. I paced the room a while, then turned and sat back down to finish what she poured out for me. And after the final dot and her new last name, I was amazed how my finger wavered on reply and then delete. And one final poem of this little subgroup. I have two poems for that. The Amy Lowell Traveling Scholarship allowed me to go around the world for a year. You don't make money through poetry. But occasionally, the manna will drop down from heaven. And I bought a business class ticket and just dropped my dachshunds off with my sister in California and headed toward Australia for 4.5 months, and then on to South Africa, the Seychelles, up through Europe, and ending at Roran's beautiful villa in Vauvenargues, overlooking where Picasso is buried, in the backside of Mont Saint-Victoire. But in Australia, I spent 4.5 months, and if you're like me and like opals, it's the place to be. Every jewelry store has just stretches of them. And I made the point whenever I passed the jewelry store, I'd go in and just look. And one day there was this young couple. And the poem is called The Burning of Troy, which is not what you might expect, even though at the end the speaker makes clear his association with it. The Burning of Troy. The opals the shop clerk tweezed between her lacquered nails flashed with such agitation, I knew the young fiancés could never afford any stone she floated before their eyes. Even her jeweler's terms to describe the shifting auroral patterns seemed neon buzz meant more to dazzle unlikely prospects than define infinite illusory depths. Fan harlequins, peacock tails, chaff and straw, a mackerel sky roiling with rarest sunset reds, much like Napoleon's gift to Josephine, the burning of Troy. Then sizing them up, she let the boy hold a boulder opal from a Queensland field. Even the name Junda jumped with fire from her tongue. She explained the hidden veins beneath the outback scrub that dozers had to peel away like skin, the mullock heaps, the pickaxed scars, the faint hope sparking with each chisel blow, till that shard chanced to split and the dust light shuddered into fire. 2 carats cut to the rough contours of the underlying ironstone which cut the glaze. So thin the brown rock bled through in part like a bruise. Still, from where I stood nearby, I glimpsed a myriad of splintered lights charging that tiny dollop in his calloused palm. How useless, I thought, my staring into its frozen turbulence. What smoldering conquests of mine could match what he was now imagining captured in that blaze? For burning such as his, I once laid waste a citadel, spent all I had. One final one, or I may want to read one for you, but it's not in the new and selected, but it's in this one. Okay, I now have two more. Bear with me. Another poem looking at a young man, this one in a grocery store, and at the checkout. It begins with an epigraph from Wallace Stevens that he wrote in a letter to Harriet Monroe, the editor of Poetry magazine. To pick a crisp salad from the garbage of the past is no snap. Watercress. Did you find everything you were looking for? The teen at the checkout asked as he scanned the groupings I'd arranged on the belts. No, I said, looking deep into his earnest face. 16 perhaps, with lashes like a pasha's fan, and the downy bloom of a first beard. He tightened his brow with concern, making golden threads in his green eyes unapproachably alluring. No fault of his. Still, I complained the market doesn't stock watercress, which I consider essential for salads with Boston and romaine. What's watercress? He was too young to appreciate the nourishing appeal of bitterness, a taste admittedly at odds with youthful cravings, yet one a man acquires almost in defiance to ingest the biting world and not succumb to its poisons. The boy nodded and smiled, all the while deconstructing my neat piles for reassembly in some adolescent application of chaos theory. A half-century his senior, childless and lacking necessary morsels of wisdom a parent needs to nurture with neglect and let inexperience stumble on its way. I watched my canvas sacks begin to brim with disorder, eggs wedged in with canned tomatoes, as if the boy were gathering a future there before him, raw ingredients of a harvested past, and I knew to hold my tongue. And if I can find it, there it is. My friend David Jarvis here, who's a minister, a wonderful piano bar player, show tunes, and good friend and an opera lover, let's put it that way. And this poem is dedicated to him. It's called Divas, and he reminded me the divas are the singers, not the characters, but it's called Divas anyway. For David Jarvis. Of course they must die, and on a grand scale. The libretti laden from the start with doom and wrapped in subtle, fateful phrasings on a clarinet or horn, then strung, it seems, over endless acts and intermissions. The divas must die in extremis, always, but piecemeal, abandoned, dissolute, consumptive, enslaved. They should wax triumphant with failings, like Tosca, jealous, duped, and trusting to a fault, she plunges nevertheless like a falcon from the castle's parapet to seize Scarpia's soul on heaven's judgment floor. Or Chocha-san, that innocent, knocked-up child, fueled on hope's bountiful nectar, flutters at the very end into womanly flame, a self-immolation that reduces Pinkerton's heart to cinders. Or Mimi, slight, insipid seamstress, her candle stub snuffed by poverty and mischance, clutches Rodolfo firmly at the last. The only key she knows will unlock love. Even convent-bound Manon Lescaut, frivolous, fickle, vain, and too enamored of the world, when on the verge of transport, grows finally aware of her own histoire before succumbing in a final wheeze, anchored in the deep harbor of a lover's devotion. Such spectacles of excess, the depths of divas epitomize what we fear most in modest lives. Happiness denied, gone in a puff, or reclaimed too late. Brava, we shout, as the house lights brighten our trembling frames. On what lesser scale should love abide? And I love you all.
Will you stay up here, Richard, because we're going to have a Q&A. Will you come up and call in to think that?
Get to see how much shorter we are. It's okay.
Questions? Comments? Praise? Praise.
Maybe we should do the Ferris Bueller. So, Richard, what are you working on now?
Slowly, on new poems. I don't know if there's going to be a ninth book. It's probably 5, 6, 7 years down the road.
Yeah.
It gets harder and harder the older you. I'm turning 70 this year. The new and selected is 40 years of work, really. I'm starting to realize I am old. There are the young voices, you know, and even younger voices than these two women. I'm baffled often by the direction I see poetry going. I persist. All I can do.
Yeah.
Why are you baffled the direction that poetry is going?
Oh, there's so much so many poems I see like music.
Meaning.
No meaning.
Well, there was a change of the guard recently at Poetry Daily. Don and Diane ran it for many, many years. And I was still editing Chelsea Magazine when Don actually came up to visit me in Maine to say, how should I put this website together? What should it do? And I really just think they did a marvelous job. And now it's been turned over to people at George Mason, is it? And there's a whole different team of editors. And I get the poem every morning and I go, huh? I just go, huh? I don't get a lot of the poems. There's, as I said, no music. Lineation, it just seems haphazard. A lot of pop references, and I always think, these things, I even read some of my poems and I say, who even knows what these things are anymore? I have a poem about going to Playland with the 8-track clicking through tunes. I mean, who even knows what an 8-track is? And that boy said, what's watercress? Excuse me, So there's my little rant on the state of American poetry.
Oh, certainly had.
No.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you stay involved. And your poetry was fantastic. But like to your point about like young people not knowing what an 8-track is,
Yeah.
or not knowing what watercress is,
Yeah.
it rests on your shoulders as the previous generation.
See, the poem says, I knew to hold my tongue. Because it's the young who have to make their way to create a future. And they do it from whatever mess we leave behind for them, or the mess that they create themselves. And, Greta Thunberg, I mean, the future is in the hands of that woman and her followers. and I'm all for it. And so don't, I'm not that bitter.
It's just the watercress, huh?
It's just the water.
I'm not a poet, but I want to comment on something you just said, because the trajectory of what you read tonight was about where you've come from and where you're going. And you started out talking about a marriage and talked about how it dissolved, and then you talked about a new friendship. And then just now you said you're stumped because you don't know where you're coming from or where you're going. But your whole career...
I'm heading toward the grave.
But let me just finish. But your whole career, from what you presented tonight, is really about wrestling with that. And so I think you have more wrestling to do and more things to say. It's just maybe not clear yet.
But it's harder and harder. It's, I often find, I use that exact same phrase in a poem that I was, 30 years ago. And to keep it that salad crisp, from the garbage of the past, it's no snap anymore. But I persist. When I work at home, I'm a freelancer, I have all the time I want. I've been freelancing since 1979. I quit a good job across the bridge, would commute from Brewster and Mount Kisco across the Fort Lee to Prentice Hall. And my boss said one day, Foerster, you have to make up your mind. Either you're going to continue with this poetry nonsense, or you're going to ruin your promising career in publishing. 2 weeks later, I quit. Haven't looked back. I've never made a lot of money, but I live well, I'm comfortable, I have a beautiful home, and I did it for love, It's what I did for love kind of thing, and I'm glad. But it's hard. I probably write 10 poems a year now, and throw most of them away. So as I said, if there's another book, it's going to be 5, 6, 7 years down the line. So I'm sure they.
10 poems a year is pretty good. 10 poems a year is pretty good.
Yeah.
So poets tend to have subjects that they constantly return to. I was wondering if each one of you could share perhaps a topic or some sort of idea that you would wish to tackle that you haven't really had the chance to, or just wondering what that might have been challenging or something like that.
I think for me, I'm always returning to voicelessness. So when I was a kid growing up in Kentucky, I was sort of a roughneck kid with a thick accent, and I didn't have the vocabulary I needed to articulate my experience or what was happening around me. And that was pretty much the topic of my first book. And then my second book, I thought, you know what? My grandmother, she's going to disappear if I don't write down her story. And so then I returned to her and tried to articulate her foul-mouthed southern. She was something else. And I think now, like looking to animals, I'm obsessed with voicelessness. Like what can I do to find language where it is missing? So I think that's what.
And I think my trajectory so far was a little bit reversed, because I think most people's first book is usually like, this is everything about my life up to this point. But I became obsessed with the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, and ended up writing a collection of poems largely in her voice, which only kind of at the end I realized I was writing to try and understand what it meant to be an artist. And then there's this book, which is really about love, and trying to understand that. And now, I'm writing these poems from the Torah, like really looking at going from inward looking to asking really big questions, like why are we here? How do we go on in the face of mortality? And I think just kind of all together, what I'm starting to understand is that it's all about connection. It's how do we connect and communicate, whether that's on a small one-to-one or in a larger, more cosmic sense.
The trajectory of my work has been basically autobiographical. starting with childhood in the Bronx, you know, the alcoholic father, some abuse that my mother let go on, and, you know, dealing with the guilt and sexuality and being married and marriage failing and feeling the guilt of that, and then finding, you know, my gay partners who two of whom died of cancer, and happy now with my third, or younger man now, of 11 years, who's a visual artist, a painter. We bought a church together, so we have a good life. But as I get older, and now that both of my parents are dead, and my sisters are really out of the picture because they're sort of embarrassed by me and what I write about. I'm trying to get into the ecological thing, but there's so many other voices doing it so well. It's difficult, and I write a lot about self and what the individual is and how we exist so much of our life, you know, in that 1/3 world of dream, and then when we are purely ourselves and not working, doing something else, and what does it mean to inhabit, you know, the brain that's in here, the body. And so I'm writing things about aging, you know, liver spots that appear, and prostate problems that start at a certain age, and just trying to make sense of always thinking of Yeats, trying to, you know, reinvigorate myself to, you know, or like Dylan Thomas, you know, rage against the eye of the light, which I know is going to happen somehow, someday. And
You're not adopting any young sisters, are
no.
you? You don't want a couple of sisters?
Well, we have to move into a bigger house.
We can visit.
We have an apartment. But that's it. I just keep trying to write new poems, and they go into a folder, and I shuffle them around and see, oh, is there, you know, a sequence happening, and when it hits a critical mass of 40, 50 poems, or a book that's 80, 96 pages or so, then I just spread everything out, and that one goes away, that one goes away, and okay, one more year of writing, and just, you know, shaping it. And I really never know where the next book is going to go. With the New and Selected, I tried to write the new poems that were picking up on themes from the earlier books, sort of to revisit them and sort of point, and even have phrases that will appear in the new poems that, oh, he used that back there, and then to compare, so they're like bookends thematically. But it's fun, but difficult. Yes.
I have a question for you, Nickole. I've read your work, and I know that your book sister, which is painful to read, deals with really hard things, sexual abuse of you at a young age. And then I know your book about animals, which also deals with some very hard things, how animals are mistreated and abused. As a poet, I hesitate to write that kind of thing because I think no one wants to read this. And even in a certain sense, it's hard for me to write, to just get into that space. So I guess my question is, did this come easily to you? Was this something that you had to do to release your own pain, or did you start off writing more kind of mild subjects?
I think I procrastinated by writing milder poems. I think that when I wrote Sister, I was writing my way out, and I was writing my way to the kind of a light that I couldn't inhabit until I had passed through the truth I needed to find to articulate what had happened to me. And I don't mean to exaggerate by saying I would not be here if not for that passage. Now, whether anybody wants to read those poems, no. But I have had a lot of survivors who have approached me, who have thanked me because it then gave voice to something similar that they knew and gave them permission then to stand with their own truths unashamed. And I think that it was funny when I first started to write about animals, a good friend of mine said, "Oh, what a feminist act." And I said, no, that was the work I did before. That was my childhood book. That was my book about my grandmother. Like, I'm doing something new. And I'll be damned if I'm not still pulling water from the same well. Because I think the truth of the treatment of non-human animals, nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and it's so violent and egregious and difficult. But damn, like if we keep turning away from it, just like if we kept turning away from the truth of childhood sexual abuse, well, it doesn't end unless somebody just says it. And then you figure out ways to solve the problem. You figure out ways to protect those children, and so that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't have any solutions. All I have is just the ability to try to observe things really closely and try to give it a voice. That's it.
No, I think you're incredibly brave.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Should we buy some books? Get some good
Maybe we get some
authors
books.
to sign?